What's up, guys? Welcome to the podcast. I am Katie Kleber.
And I'm Melissa Stafford.
And today on the Fresh RN podcast, we are going to talk about proactively preventing nurse burnout. It's a big topic right now in nursing because I think a lot of us are feeling, no pun intended, the heat.
Yes.
From burnout.
True.
There's some pretty alarming statistics. I don't have them readily available right in front of me, but I know a lot of nurses experience it. And
at all points in their career.
Yes. And as the new grad who's like, oh,
right.
And then, at various points we experience it. And how do we deal with it? How in a healthy way, right? Not just a Band-Aid kind of a way.
Yeah. Not just throw your hands up and quit necessarily either.
Right. Because I think some people think to do that, you need to take as much time off possible or go to grad school and get the highest you can, and that's not burnout prevention.
No,
it's not. Because if you're not able to kind of process what you're going through now in a healthy way, if you keep going up the professional ladder, I don't think that's going to change.
You're still going to experience those symptoms at whatever job you do. So learning how to proactively deal with that so that you can deal with the times that are tough.
Yeah.
Is a good skill, and it's a hard skill. Yeah. It's really difficult. And that's why I'm glad you're talking about it. 'Cause
so this is kind of my jam. This is my thing. I love talking about this and something called self-compassion, and we're going to kind of flesh that out a little bit. But I do think burnout and self-care do go hand in hand. One thing I want to dispel the myth that self-care, a lot of us equate that with massages and trips and vacation and getting away from work as much as possible.
Getting away from life.
Getting away from life. Yeah, distraction. Mm-hmm. But self-care is looks a lot less like indulgence and a lot more like rest, boundaries, routine, gratitude, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of flesh that out a little bit. First, I think the first aspect is appropriate work boundaries. And we were talking about this kind of offline a little bit, but about a lot of us, and I did this, I know a lot of people do, is we spend so much of our time in work and working that it's very easy to get our identity really wrapped up in our profession. Yeah. And I think especially with maybe nursing or a physician or provider, because you spend so much time, you give so much of yourself to that role, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very easy to have that kind of enmeshment there. But the important thing, I think, to realize, though, is that there does need to be appropriate boundaries between home and work, because it's very easy to give way too much to work, and then you don't have that at home, right? Mm-hmm. And then the boundary is kind of skewed, and employers, it's a business, right? They're going to take as much as you're willing to give, right? While some might say, hey, this is too much or whatever, but it's typically on the shoulder or the responsibility of the nurse to exercise that boundary, right? To say, all right, I'm not doing that. So I want to quantify this in a way where you view work with your hospital or your employer as a business relationship, because that's how they're viewing it with you, right? This is morbid, if you died today, someone's got to do your job tomorrow, right? So while you do have put that your unique touch there, there's still going to be nursing care that's provided, right? So our employers are replaceable to us. We're replaceable to them. That's kind of that's a harsh truth, but it's a truth, right?
It is.
And I don't want that to devalue anyone's contribution, but it's a business relationship. You have something that they need. A nursing license and an ability to provide nursing care and that knowledge and whatnot. They have money and benefits. So, they need to provide you with that so that you go in and you're right. It's not like I would be doing this if I didn't get paid, right? We wouldn't be. Well, maybe we would volunteer here and there, but if we're not getting paid, that,
Well, when people get hired, that's one of the things they look at. How much money am I going to make at hospital A versus how much money am I going to make at hospital B? Yeah, because I could be a neuro ICU nurse in the town that I'm in now. I could be a neuro ICU nurse in Alaska. I could be a neuro ICU nurse in Canada. So there's a lot of places that you could offer your skills, and then you're kind of figuring out where do I fit.
Right. And where's the balance as equal as possible, right? Like, this is a business partnership. And I think it's very easy with nursing to look at our relationship with our patients as how we look at our relationship with our employer. And that's different.
It is.
So, like, we tend to feel this responsibility to staff our unit, to fix the problems in the hospital, to overextend ourselves because we feel that we're servicing our patients.
So, I think about that. I had a conversation with some of the newer nurses in my unit, and like much of the country, we experienced a staffing shortage as well.
Right.
And there were 2 of them in particular that were picking up a ton of extra time. And for the short term, it's extra money, it's overtime, my paycheck's going to look great. But then, I cautioned them and, be careful, because will come a time when you mentally are struggling, emotionally are struggling with making sure that you get enough rest or taking time away from work, because they saw, I think they saw how everyone was so thrilled to have them come and be an extra nurse. And it's true, because I'm
great.
Incredibly grateful to nurses who pick up an extra shift and come in and, what have you. But they put so much value in pleasing all the other nurses that they work with that I was worried that they're going to miss out on taking care of themselves.
And that is this crucial aspect of these healthy boundaries and proactively preventing getting down there, getting down that road, because it feels great when you come in and they're, oh my God, you saved us. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
It does feel good.
It does.
But then when that turns into an expectation, and then, or you're picking up a ton and you haven't seen your kid in 5 days, or you haven't been able to do some of the things you do to take care of yourself. You haven't had time to exercise or go to
the grocery store,
do the stuff to take care of yourself, because you're constantly pouring into work. There's nothing left for you or the loved ones around you. So I think it's very to especially for new nurses, to walk into it thinking, okay, I bring something to the table. This is a business relationship, and part of that business relationship is you got to do what you're expected to do, right? You got to do your holidays, your hours and whatnot. But if you're like constantly picking up all these extra hours and they're depending upon you overextending yourself to fill their like void, like that's not cool. And that's where we have to exercise our boundaries. I say, the way I like to say that is, don't set yourself on fire to keep your patients warm. At the end of the day, it's the hospital's job to staff the unit. If you are running on fumes, like, that's not healthy to do that, right? And it's not sustainable either.
It's not sustainable. It's not healthy for you.
Right.
I mean, if you are mentally burnt out, exhausted, how much attention to detail do you think you really bring to the table that day?
Right.
I mean, we take care of patients' lives. That's the bottom line. We're nurses. We take care of patients' lives. And if we make a mistake, it really does have an impact on the outcome of the patient. And think about what happens when you're really tired. And errors, right? And nobody comes to work to make an error,
right?
Nobody comes to work to not do their best job ever. But it's really important to recognize your mental health and making sure that you take that time away to set those boundaries so you can reset yourself.
And so what that means is, you know what, I'm gonna have to be comfortable saying no.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's hard, especially when you know how it feels when you're drowning. But you know what, that's part of what you have to do to take care of yourself. And I know there's a balance here, because hospitals are dying for nurses.
Yeah.
They are.
Yeah.
But to bear that burden as the bedside nurse who's trying to like survive, to staff your unit, I think that's blurring the boundaries, right? Like, I've got to be able to take care of myself. So if I'm like overextending myself to a point where I'm not having I'm not in a good mental space for myself or my family, then like it's not mutually beneficial at that point, right? Especially if you're not getting compensated more. One resource I love is an Instagram account, Whole Life Nurse, at Whole Life Nurse. Great account where it's like empowering you to kind of say no when you need to. And
be okay with that.
And be okay. That's part of it. It's one thing to say no. It's another thing to be okay with their response. And I've actually seen leaders on that say, you know what, we ask people to do stuff or, I want to know, I need you to say no, and not always say yes. We need to be able to be okay with saying no and not providing a reason. Hey, can you stay late tonight? No, I can't. Thanks. Yeah. And leaving it at that.
Yeah.
I don't need to provide a reason to have a life and be a human outside of the hospital. We don't exist to make the hospital function. We are human beings who work at the hospital. And it's like if you think about like working, let's say you work overtime constantly for 5 years and then you're like, I'm done. I can't deal with it. But what if you had been practicing like cultivating some good boundaries, taking your PTO, saying no, and you were finding balance. And would you be done in 5 years? Maybe not.
Right.
Would it you know what I mean? Like if you're prudent with your day to day and saying no and being okay with missing out on that great feeling of them coming in and saving the day, right? Like
everybody wants to be the one that comes in and saves the day.
Yeah. And then it feels good right then.
Yep.
But then 5 hours into your shift, you're like, God, I'm so tired. I can't keep doing that, right? So I think that's part of it. But then I have another kind of concept here to introduce, and it's something called self-compassion. So we've heard, many of us have heard of the word compassion, and I think a lot of us equate that with warmth and helping out our patients and being kind and whatnot. But it's actually a lot deeper than that. There's actually some neurobiology to compassion, which is very interesting. So and I'm gonna try to get in. I'm trying to decide how deep I want to get into this. You know what? I'm not gonna go into the neuro because this will make this episode like 2 hours long. Okay.
All right.
But I will make that resource available of going into that. What I want to talk about is actually how to practice self-compassion. But essentially, it's kind of like working out for your brain. The more you do this, the easier it is. You have areas of your brain that light up when you have an emotional stimulus. But it's your amygdala, but it's very easily aroused. And so it's our job to kind of regulate it, or else we overconnect with pain and suffering. And then we can get lost in that. So it's kind of practicing compassion and self-compassion is actually a very complex way to process information that we're all capable of, but we just have to be conscientious of it. So self-compassion is kind of like seeing an emotional stimulus and choosing to acknowledge it and lean into that which is difficult with intention, but a balanced awareness. So we don't fall into the pain or if you had a mistake, over-identifying with the mistake or a failure or a tough moment with a patient. Like I can think of so many times at the bedside in neuro when I needed some self-compassion where, this patient is having a difficult moment, but me also being here, this is difficult for me too. And my experience matters just as much. I'm not here to just pour everything into this person and what's going on here. I need care too. And it's up to me to provide that to myself. So it's a way to regulate your emotional response, lean into that which is difficult intentionally, and be present, but not diving all the way in, if that makes sense. So it's comprised of 3 things. Let's see, what's the first one? Is mindfulness, and then common humanity and self-kindness. So I'll just quickly explain those. Mindfulness is simply acknowledging the difficulty of the moment. That's all it is like, okay, this is a tough situation for this family, but this is also tough for me. Or the fact that I did all this work to try to get this job and I didn't get it. Or, I feel really overwhelmed with whatever. It's identifying the emotion and naming it. The psychologists call it name it to tame it, because your amygdala lights up when you have an emotional response. But what's interesting is they've done a bunch of MRI scans, and they noted when people are able to name the emotion, their amygdala activity calms down significantly. So it's like it's regulating the emotional response and allowing the emotion to visit you but not hijack you.
So I'm afraid of the situation, but I'm going to get through it. Or I'm angry because somebody didn't come in to save me. I'm drowning.
Right. I feel really angry about this. This is a really tough place to be. That's all mindfulness is. And it's conscientiously regulating your amygdala response, which is pretty cool, right? Neuro-nerding out, right?
There you go.
So that's step one. And the lovely thing about self-compassion is this is not something you make extra time for. This is something you do in the moment as you experience tough things. So keeping that in mind, and this takes moments, and I do this all the time. And it gets so much easier as you teach your brain to respond this way. So the next thing is common humanity. The common humanity piece is acknowledging that we're all fallible, imperfect humans that have imperfect life journeys. A lot of us, whenever we screw up or we have something doesn't go the way we want it to, we have feelings of inadequacy or whatever it is. We tend to over-identify with it, get lost in the negative emotion, and then isolate ourselves. And thinking no one else would make this mistake, or no one else would screw up like this. No one else would put themselves out there to get this job and not get it. I'm the only one that, it's very easy to get lost in that and isolate yourself. But isolation significantly increases your suffering, right? It just makes it so much worse. But if you can conscientiously remind yourself that everybody makes mistakes. Everybody struggles, right? We talk about that on the podcast all the time, how important it is that nurses realize they're not robots and they are going to make mistakes. Mm-hmm. It's if you can conscientiously remind yourself, be active. You might know that, but it's really hard to recall that information in the midst of suffering or tough feelings, negative emotions. So this is a tough moment, but you know what? Everybody has tough moments. And then finally, the last part is self-kindness. So you kind of have to have a warmth aspect to kind of balance it all out. So the way I like to think of this one is if you imagine a little loved one in your life. So maybe it's a son or daughter, maybe it's got fur and 4 legs, I don't know. But let's say they're suffering and they're hurting and they run up to you and they need your comfort and they're scared, they're sad, they're mad, whatever it is. And you wrap them up in your arms. And what do you say to them to let them know, you know what, it's going to be okay. And for me, when I think about if my daughter would do that, I'd say, you know, it's okay. I'm right here. We're going to get through this. I'm right here. But imagine saying that to yourself, right? Because we all need this compassion just as much as anyone else in our lives, right? Mm-hmm. But sometimes we got to remind ourselves that. So we got to have that warmth in there. So I call this a self-compassion break. So I'm seeing a tough moment and I acknowledge the fact that it's tough. Kind of give myself permission to acknowledge that it's tough. Then remind myself that everybody struggles and that it's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to get through this. And tell yourself that, right? It takes moments. But if you start to respond like that in the moment like that, then you can process the emotion in a healthier way as opposed to stifling it or ruminating on it, because that makes it worse. And then we don't process things in a healthy way. Mm-hmm. And then, so they've found that people that do this, they regulate their emotions much better. And it's equated to, actually there's a lot of studies on self-compassion, self-compassion.org, great resources on it. They've actually got quite a few studies on nurses and its impact on nurses. Specifically, its inverse relationship to burnout. So nurses who practice this a lot have low levels of burnout, and nurses who don't practice this have high levels of burnout. And what's interesting is nurses who have high levels of, it's common humanity, and I can't remember, I think it's common humanity and something else. Gosh, I can't remember it. But they had higher levels of personal accomplishment scores. So they were people that were kind of putting themselves out there to do more things. They were able to do that because they were practicing, you know what, it's not going to be perfect, but I'm going to try. I'll put myself out there. I'm going to try. So I'm such a proponent of this practice. I do it myself, and I've seen the fruit of it in my life, and I highly encourage people to check that out and consider responding differently when they maybe, screw up, or they're mad someone didn't come in, or they're mad at this patient being a jerk to them, or whatever it is, right? Respond. And it's interesting how you can process situations better. I've learned I have a healthier response to something, a more balanced response in the moment to someone else. I'm able to connect more and provide empathy without overdoing it, because I was doing that. I certainly was over connecting with those negative emotions at the bedside. It's just balances things out so much better, and it gives and has had a profound effect on my emotional regulation. So that's kind of my my jam there.
So when nurses think of burnout, like, what do you think when nurses say I'm burnt out? What do you think that they're experiencing? Like, do you say, if I said I'm burnt out, is that I don't want to do my job anymore? Is that, what are symptoms of burnout? Maybe that's where I'm trying to go with that.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think people don't realize when they're burnt out.
Yeah.
Right? Because also with nursing, kind of a lot of nurses are burnt out, and it's almost like the culture, and like exhaustion is a badge of honor a little bit, right? Like, it's like, oh, I've worked 20 shifts this week, or what,
Yeah.
So I pulled up questions from Mayo Clinic. So consider these. Have you become cynical or critical at work? Do you drag yourself to work and have trouble getting started? Have you become irritable or impatient with coworkers or patients? Do you lack the energy to be consistently productive? Do you find it hard to concentrate? Do you lack satisfaction from your achievements? Do you feel disillusioned about your job? Are you using food, drugs, alcohol, etc. to feel better, or simply not feel? Have your sleep habits changed? And finally, are you troubled by unexplained headaches, stomach or bowel problems, or other physical complaints? Now, naturally, just one of those, clinical picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of nurses could probably say yes to a handful of those.
Yeah.
Understandably so. So, and I think what's really important is not waiting until we're in emergency mode before we do anything about it.
Yeah.
Because that's like calling a code when we could have called a rapid response maybe 2 hours ago, or we could have been a little more proactive 8 hours ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So encourage people, if they're starting to notice this kind of stuff, I encourage people to look more into self-compassion. I'll have some resources in our show notes. But also to tell you a little about my story is, like, I was in the neuro ICU, right? And I was having trouble disconnecting the dots from the emotional pain that my patients were experiencing. And it was really enmeshing into my personal life. I started having anxiety attacks. You're well aware of that. Like, and I couldn't disconnect the dots, and I was doing all this worst case scenario thinking. I had no concept of self-compassion. And it was like on my brain all the time that everyone's going to die this ugly ICU death. And, I could not separate the reality from that was work into my home world reality. So I actually, a lot of hospitals have EAP, Employee Assistance Program, where you can get free counseling from people who are trained to work with healthcare providers. So I actually started doing that, and it made a world of difference because I felt like I was starting. That was probably a rapid response. It wasn't quite a code.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't to like a mental breakdown, but I was starting to feel like if I don't address this, we're going to get there. Like I couldn't get on a plane without freaking out, and I need to travel for work. And little everyday things were making me really anxious. Like turning left on like a certain road, like that kind of stuff. I was having this unreasonable response to it. So first, seeing a counselor really helped. Even just the first session, just to have a third party person validate that what I'm doing or at the bedside is really hard. Mm-hmm. And it is, because we see one of the big reasons too is not just the workload, but a lot of us are experiencing vicarious trauma. And for those that are unfamiliar with that term, another word for it is secondary trauma. So if a patient, let's say, here's an example of a time I experienced vicarious trauma. I was taking care of a guy who was in his 30s who reminded me of his husband who was brain dead. And the way that his wife responded to him being brain dead with his 2 kids is exactly how I probably would have. And it hit me to my core. And that traumatized me. While I wasn't the wife, I was right there in it. And so vicarious trauma is you experiencing trauma as like a caregiver, or watching it, you're traumatized by it. So nurses, physicians, CNAs, also counselors, even like someone describing trauma just verbally can also do that to somebody else, or create that. So that was really being compounded, So nurses experience that sometimes on a weekly basis, often, and we can, out of self-preservation, cut off emotionally and can't connect with patients out of self-preservation because they're just way too in the midst of trauma. And it makes sense. It absolutely does. But you can't keep doing it, or else you're going to you're going to have to completely emotionally cut yourself off. And then then you're not serving yourself or your patient, right? The best way that either of you can. And then you really can't disconnect the dots. So I think it would be prudent of us to do this to try to, I guess, for those of us that have been in it for a while, back out of our burnout and teach the younger generation to proactively prevent it. And part of that is also, not giving people heck when they say, no, I can't come in. When other people exercise appropriate boundaries, unless they're meeting their requirements for work, they're doing their thing, but they're exercising appropriate boundaries. Hey, that's cool. That's good. And even in our personal lives too, like, if I go to bed at 9 p.m. and I'm not afraid to say, hey guys, I'm going to go because my rest is super important to me. And I love hanging out with y'all, but I need to take care of me. Right. So when other people exercise boundaries, we should be okay with it because we're going to do it too. Right. It's a two-way street. So, teaching people that from day one, I think will enable people to be at the bedside longer, as long as they're, being prudent about it, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think that mindfulness is a real important aspect of this. So knowing that those questions that you read out, am I grumpy when I'm at work all the time? Am I snippy? Do I come home and snap at my loved ones?
Emotional reactivity is,
for the most mundane things, I mean, am I mad that my husband didn't do the laundry or what have you? And what is my response to that? And for you to be mindful of when your reactions kind of tip over into the more irrational ones, or the more exaggerated ones, I guess I should say, really.
Like having a knee-jerk, like a good indicator is, do I consistently have knee-jerk reactions, or am I choosing my response?
Yeah, that's true.
So, do I lash out, or wait, when I'm frustrated, do I pause for a second before I choose how I want to respond in this? Because if you can't control that knee-jerk reaction, maybe we got something going on.
Yeah.
That we need to chat through.
And before you get to every single yes to every single one of those questions that you read out is, what do I do about that? And then that becomes the being mindful and really allowing yourself to identify the emotion that you're experiencing.
And give yourself permission to feel it.
Yeah.
I think an important concept, I like to compare our relationship with our emotions. They're not who we are. They're something we feel, but they're not who we are. But it's very easy to cross that boundary to say, I feel like a bad nurse, so I must be one. I feel stupid, so I must be one. I feel depressed, so I must have depression and be a depressed person. But emotions are kind of like waves in an ocean, right? Some days they're huge and unsurmountable, and some days they're small, and sometimes they're medium, and sometimes they're barely there. But the waves cannot consume the emotion or the ocean. Much like we are separate from our emotions, and the more that we can be kind of an objective observer of them and say, whoa, I feel really frustrated right now. Like me and John got in some argument, and I had this like heightened reaction recently. And normally I would have dug deeper into it, and we would have like gotten like, we would have butted heads, but I pulled back, and I was like, you know what? I'm having a really strong reaction to that right now, and I don't know why. I don't want to continue this conversation right now because I think I'm not in a great headspace because something triggered me. And I want to figure that out before I dive deeper into this. And being able to be like, okay, all right, cool. It's
hard to do.
It is hard to do. It's
Yeah.
hard to go from reacting to responding. And it's a journey, and it takes time, and it's a practice. Like self-compassion is a practice. But the lovely thing is the more that you do it, the easier it is.
So how would you, because I think preventing burnout is something that is very important because much like you said, we have a profession where we give so much to so many people. And a big part of what makes us successful is the personal connection with our patients and the families.
Mm-hmm.
So what suggestions do you think that we could offer to learn to set boundaries, whether it be with patients or with employers?
Yeah.
So, is it fair to suggest that, a new nurse be aware of how many hours they put in during the week? And what is their trigger for before they get to the point where they're so exhausted they can't concentrate? What is that limitation and how to identify that, I guess?
Yeah, like I think we all need to learn that for ourselves. And I highly recommend if you're a brand new nurse not to put in overtime because it's already emotionally and mentally and physically exhausting to put in extra shifts. I think that's dangerous waters, I guess. And we really need the break more than ever then because it takes a lot at the beginning. A lot of mental
everything that you do takes a lot of mental
yes it
energy,
does
everything.
Like I think back to when I was learning stuff and how much more mental energy it took to do some simple tasks than it does when you're experienced and you can just fly through them, and it's no big deal for me to hang some blood, give 3 IV push meds and 7 pills and hang up an antibiotic. No big deal. But to a newbie it's like, oh my god, that's going to take me forever and I got to make
Yep.
So being cognizant of that like mental load that you've got and giving and advocating for yourself to your employer and to yourself and to your loved one. Hey, I got to take a break. I need, and so exhaustion is not the requirement for rest, right? It's a sign that you waited way too long. You don't wait till you're exhausted to rest. We are all humans that need rest. We don't have to, get all the way to that physical exhaustion to go to bed and to say no, right? We need to say no way before we're getting to that exhaustion point. Because how can we participate in life if we're constantly exhausted? And it's up to us to say no in a graceful, kind way. And to go back about teaching people boundaries, I think it goes back to learning assertiveness with your patients, with your colleagues, with doctors, right? And cultivating those healthy boundaries to because if I'm assertive, I can kindly acknowledge what's going on with you, but I'm going to still make sure that my self-respect and my point of view and things are considered here. And that might mean telling a patient, hey, you're not going to talk to me like that, or saying that to a provider. We've had to do that before. Hey, I'm sorry. You can call me back when you're or don't say don't say I'm sorry. Say, excuse me, can you call me back when you've calmed down or whatever? I have a lot of talking points. I talk a lot about the assertiveness in the ICU course because I believe ICU nurses need to learn assertiveness to a different level than other specialties because of how high stakes it can be and how you need to communicate quickly and you have intense stuff and you got to be assertive, but you don't want to be aggressive,
That's a tricky boundary.
It is a tricky boundary. It is. So I dive deeper into that, but in that new nurse masterclass, I have a whole thing on assertiveness because we do have patients that'll manipulate us.
Oh yeah.
We do have physicians that'll manipulate. Okay, there's that physician who always wants the nurses to enter orders for them. That's enabling, right? I'm not going to enable that behavior because it's going to create more work for me, right? Same thing with the patient, right? I'm going to kindly remind you that I'm not going to do that for you. In a hey, you know what? I'm like we've said before. I'm here to do as much for and help you do as much for yourself that you can't do. And that's the same thing with other people around us. And if we, a good way to know if our boundaries have really been crossed is if we get around that person and we feel resentful, we feel angry, or we want to avoid them entirely. Maybe they've crossed a boundary, and we've people may cross our boundaries. It's up to us to let them know that they got there and that they're not gonna.
And it's something that we own for ourselves, honestly.
Yes.
Is to let people know that we're there.
Yeah, because you know what? You may be around some aggressive people. And I mean, that might be, honestly, to get through med school. Some of them, that's how they did it. That's how they survived, is they were aggressive. Not saying that's right. But they may need some extra reminders. And I mean, I know I've had many patients who were aggressive.
Oh yeah.
And they needed to know that that's not how that's not how this is going to go. All right? And what that means is, you've come up to my boundary, I'm going to let you know in a respectful way, hey, that's not how this is going to go. But the other side of that is, the rest of the shift, I'm not going to shun you. Or the next time I see you, I'm not going to be a jerk to you, because I'm going to be professional. So let's say at the beginning of the shift, my patient wants me to mop the floor. Had that happen before, and wants me to take out all the trash, and I'm dying trying to get meds to all my patients, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to validate. I hear you. I hear that you want me to do this, but we have a wonderful housekeeping staff. That's their responsibility. My responsibility is to provide safe care to all my patients who are critically ill, or whatever you want to say. And then the rest of the day, not be mad that he thought I was going to mop the floor for him, right? I'm not going to bring that through the rest of the day.
That's an important piece, having a conversation with a patient who's cursing at me.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't talk to me that way. I'm not going to speak with you that way.
Mm-hmm.
I ask that you do the same.
Yes, that's a good talking point. Or another one is, I am your nurse here to take care of you. I'm treating you with respect. I ask for the same in return. Boom.
Yeah.
Drop that bomb. See how they respond.
But then the rest of the day is, you have to be respectful. You can't be snarky.
Yes.
You have to just continue business as usual. And sometimes that means putting on a front for a little while.
Mm-hmm. Because it sucks when you get treated like that. But you know what? If you are firm on your boundaries, it feels a lot less slimy.
So what about the other side of that coin? What about those families that really want to engage you on a personal level? Oh, let's be friends on Facebook, or let's do our Instagram accounts, or whatever. I mean,
that's a really good question. That's really relevant now. Well, first of all, I would check your policy of your hospital of the social media, because that may explicitly say, don't do that or I'm going to fire you.
Yeah.
That's one thing. But you know what's, it's tough. The easy answer is never do that. The gray area is, I walked through their worst nightmare with them, and I want to see how he's going to do. And I would be lying if I said I didn't look on Facebook to see how, not that I'm friends with them, but see how a patient did. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to, so to be honest, I don't have a good answer for that.
But that's where it comes, that's where the boundaries,
mm-hmm.
you have to kind of recognize your own.
Yeah.
And you have, what might be safe space for me might be different than your safe space, Kati.
Yes.
I mean, honestly.
Yeah, and that's why it's cultivating your own unique boundaries and what you're okay with. Like a common thing. So we walk through life and death with people, and we get very intimate with one another because we're seeing wild things at work. So what's natural is for us to talk about very intimate things with each other. Turns into a lot of sex talk, doesn't it?
It can.
And people ask some things that it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they asked me that, or they're talking about that. And that sometimes and some people are totally open with that kind of stuff, and a lot of people aren't. And being able to say, all right, this is funny, but don't talk about my sex life anymore. All right, guys, this is a boundary.
Yep.
And you can say it in a tactful way, but it's like, hey, this is, and how that's different for different people. And it's up to us to be like, no, thank you, in a kind, assertive, tactful way. But part of that is learning your own boundaries and learning yourself. And what are you okay with? What are you truly okay with? Not what you think you're supposed to be okay with. Right?
That's a different conversation.
It is,
sure.
And that's a totally different. That's getting into learning your personal identity, your self-worth. That's a whole nother conversation. But I think a good indicator is, how do I feel after that interaction? Does it feel slimy? Does it feel or do I dread this person? Viоlated's not like I don't know if that's the right word, but I don't know. Like, there's those people that you're like, I don't really want to be around them, and I don't know why. And maybe they crossed a boundary.
Yeah.
And it's all a learning thing. As we learn our boundaries, and Easy ways. And it's tough too when you're a people pleaser. A lot of us are.
Oh yeah.
It's a lot of us will quickly say yes to dispel those negative emotions so we don't have to deal with it. It's a reaction, not a response, right? So, you can practice saying no in low risk situations. That's a good way to get used to your boundaries. And, you know what? No, thank you. I can't work tonight. No, this actually isn't what I ordered for dinner or whatever.
Yeah.
Like practicing in low risk situations can help you build your assertiveness.
You ordered a cheeseburger without onions. It's got onions on it. You can tell them,
yeah,
this is not what I ordered.
Exactly. So it's like, I'm a recovering people pleaser. I'm not perfect in that at all. I don't think it's a switch. We think you're supposed to just all of a sudden get over that kind of stuff, but that's deeply ingrained in our personalities and who we are. So, realizing that kind of stuff. And I think, going back, boundaries, learning what your boundaries look like, and practicing assertiveness and self-compassion. I think when you put that stuff together, it makes working in this really taxing and exhausting job doable in a way where you can get like the joy out of it that you really like, where I can connect to my patients and provide them authentic empathy without great emotional cost to myself. I can come in and be a great team player and really enjoy this dynamic and provide value. And I can go home and I can be mentally present with my kids. That's that. And then I can feel challenged, but also I can step back and enjoy my life, and I have a good balance. I think that's the sweet spot. But it's hard when you come out the gate overcommitting and not having any concept of boundaries. So that's why I kind of like the term of, for those of us that have been in it for a while and been doing it not so great, like I call it like backing out of burnout.
Yeah.
And then for the newbies, I want to help prevent them from getting there.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I do. I like that. I think that was a great summary, is, recognizing those symptoms of when things are getting to be too much and learning how to set those boundaries early. So hopefully you can stop that before it gets to the red zone and you're ready to throw up your hands and quit.
Right.
But if you're in that bad spot right now, having that, that self-compassion to recognize what's going on and to allow yourself to feel those emotions, but then find ways to turn it into a positive or to refocus yourself on something different. I think it's a good skill to have that takes time.
It does because it's like you'll have that experience and then you'll respond that same old way, and then you're like, oh wait, what about that self-compassion thing?
Yeah.
So just a reminder, the self-compassion break is this mindfulness, acknowledging the moment. This is a tough situation. The second one, common humanity. You know what? Everybody struggles. Not everybody gets the job. Not everybody gets the whatever. We all make nurse mistakes. If you need to listen to that or you need to listen to our mistakes podcast again,
for sure.
that, that should, and actually in my courses, what I've started doing now when I record videos is saying, I'm going to connect with you on the level of common humanity right now and tell you how I screwed this up. And it's so that we can all get on that level playing field of we're human, and being when we are able to be honest about that stuff, we can connect. When we connect, we feel safe, and that's what we want. We want to have psychological safety with one another. And then finally, the warmth. I'm okay. I can get through this. One good one is, may I give myself the compassion that I need. I love that. Like, may I be kind to myself, and kind of give ourselves permission to be kind and compassionate to ourselves. Because I think a lot of us err on that side of, I need to do it the hard way, and I need to be hard on myself because I'm not going to be better if I don't do that. But what ends up happening is that creates performance anxiety, and that undermines the whole process. And that's a whole nother topic. But encourage people to respond to moments of inadequacy with and challenges and mistakes with self-compassion and care and curiosity about, hey, maybe I needed to learn something here, and I mean, I can ask those questions, but let me process this in a healthy way first. So yeah.
We could talk like hours on.
I could. And I was telling you guys, I'm pretty sure. So my husband, some of you might know, he's a licensed professional counselor, and I think I want to create with him, make a course on this to walk, because a lot of these concepts, you got to hear them a few times. Like, I've been researching self-compassion for 4 years now, and it's like, okay, this is starting to really settle in, and I'm implementing it. I would love for my ceiling to be the floor of the newbies, where they can take that and like immediately understand it and apply it, so they don't have to get
to the point where we struggle so much.
Yeah, where you're having freaking I didn't have panic attacks, anxiety attacks on a plane, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nah. So anyways, I'm thinking that that's what's going to be coming is a course on that, because it's easier to walk through it in a structured way instead of little pieces here and there.
I would take it.
You take it.
I'm just saying.
I'm just saying.
For those of you who don't know, Katie's really, we've bonded a lot over the years, and sometimes Katie just has a way of saying something that makes perfect sense.
Oh, I like that. Can we write that down? Put that in my affirmation journal.
But it makes a big difference. I'm in here for almost 20 years now, so I have to take those moments to be very mindful myself and to recognize very recently I needed to take a step back and put some boundaries in place. And it was easier to do it this time than it was the first time.
Yeah.
But I still, because I am a people pleaser, it was hard for me to say no.
Yeah, and you're scared to say no, but then when you do, so this is what I like to say. Momentary discomfort is much better than long-term resentment. Right. I would much rather be uncomfortable in that moment of saying no to that extra shift or those extra hour, whatever, than resent people and organization when I have to come in or I have to do, So that's, kind of my.
See, that's one of those statements. Just like that. She did it.
Oh, that's good.
Just like whatever makes your nurse heart sing.
Yeah. Whatever makes your nurse heart sing, y'all. Do that. And don't get burnout, darn it. And we'll teach you how.
Yeah. It's awesome. We're all human. So.
Yes. We're all human on our imperfect journey learning this stuff. Just, yeah. It's interesting. You look at people who have been nurses for many years and you think they got it all figured out.
Nope.
We don't. We might be a great poker faces and look like we know what we're doing clinically, but sometimes that other side of things is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
But we got good poker faces, so you don't know. A lot of us, sometimes our MO is so nobody finds out how much we're hurting on the inside, because we got to be that strong one at the bedside, and to be able to actually feel some of that pain is terrifying.
It is.
Yeah. Or admit we're wrong, or to admit, that kind of stuff can be utterly terrifying. To experience some of those feelings. And I think some people have a hesitancy to practice stuff like self-compassion, because that means you got to feel the feeling to let it go by instead of stifling it. Because a lot of us stifle it or go into distraction mode. We look at our phone all night. We go have a bottle of wine when we get home, right? We don't want to feel that stuff. So starting to feel it can be pretty intense. But it's interesting reading the research and how if you process it healthfully in a balanced way, your body actually responds a lot better to that, which is interesting. We could go on and on.
Changes your brain chemistry.
Yes.
More to come.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, anyways. All right, guys. Well, I think that rounds out our episode. This was a long one, I think. A little lengthy, but I hope you found it valuable. If you have a moment, I would love for you to comment, rate our podcast. It's so incredibly helpful to us. And our show notes are freshrn.com/46, where I'll have some research, or actually I have quite a bit of research studies on self-compassion, some of the neurobiology, as well as I'm pretty sure I have another talk on this that I could put of my own on there. And I'll just put a bunch of resources on there for you guys that you guys can check out. All right, nurses, thanks, and stay fresh.
Damn girl, better hit the floor. All the other fellas better run for the door. Stop, drop, and roll with me. I got the heat that'll make you scream.